G'day Bomber fans, our AFL team is flying as we know, second on the ladder, but for the first time all year I reckon, our VFL team is actually going okay as well. We're getting wins, we've got stars returning, so today I'm going to go over the last fortnight, talk about the AFL listed players that run through in the VFL and give you a little update on them. There were 14 AFL listed players in the Rezzies, so a lot to get through. Little recap, we played Williamstown 2 games ago, we had them on the ropes, they are second on the ladder by the way, we only lost because we let them kick 5 goals to 1 in the last quarter. They got up by 11 points, great performance from the team though, and then the week after we absolutely belted North Melbourne in the wet, 51 points, more than our AFL team won by. In this period we had 3 injured players return, Ridley, Reid and Jye Menzie. They all impressed. We have a debutant coming into the AFL team for the weekend, as you all probably know, so let's get into it. Here are the player recaps. Alrighty, Elijah Tsatas, he's been in ripping form recently and it was obviously rewarded with a start against North Melbourne in the AFL. He had that 40 disposal game against Collingwood in the VFL a few weeks back and followed it up with 31 touches, 11 clearances. He was just everywhere again against Williamstown. His inside work is unreal. He's been knocking the door down at selection with his latest performances. He kind of had to play against North or he probably would have been quite unhappy. He just creates opportunities in close and personal for outside runners, which is great. I love it, but it's a little bit annoying because he's played in such a different way in the AFL and you can't really take out any of our current inside mids for him the way they're playing. I think many have been iffy on Tsatas lately because of his AFL form, but I think we're seeing a lot to like in the reserves. He's starting to really dominate games a lot, not just show promise, but tear matches apart, so it's been a good run for him. I think for him to really become a consistent AFL player, he probably needs to sharpen up his ball use and outside game because that's the role he will play for us at the top level in the next year or so, I'd say. Shiel was another one who only played the 1 game in this period, a few of those around. He was brought up to the AFL as the sub against North. He was bound to game at some stage too. He was steadily going along against Williamstown. He played a lot more on the outside than he has been. He still had the 24 touches. He was always much better than those around him. Copy and paste everything I've said about Shiel in the last few videos and put it here. He's just been consistently good in the reserves without setting the world alight, and he didn't really get much of a chance in the AFL, to be honest. Only a couple of touches after he was subbed onto the field. Sam Weideman was the carryover emergency for the AFL team during the reserves game against Williamstown, so he did not play in that match. He did, however, play against North in a stacked backline. He was alongside Hayes, Reid and Ridley, so there was a lot of height down there. I actually thought he was really good for the most part and didn't look out of place at all. I was keen to see how he would go alongside 2 AFL ready key defenders, and he slot in really well. I think it helps that North were not entering with much promise. It was wet, but he could only do what was asked, and he did that and more. He's showing that he is a good defensive cover for when we have injuries. I wouldn't hate seeing him in the AFL. He's clearly ready for it, but he wouldn't break into the team through form. It would come through injury, so he just has to keep playing like he is now and waiting for his chance. Jordan Ridley returned from his back-to-back quad injuries in the VFL. He was a class above, obviously, even in the wet. It was always going to be the case. The stats you see on the screen, by the way, are just from one half of footy. He was rested in the second half, just so he didn't overwork himself so soon after coming back into the team. He played a bit smaller than I thought he would, but I guess it makes sense considering we have Hayes and Reid and Weideman down back. He was sought out to use the ball, being our best kick back there, and didn't make too many mistakes. There wasn't much rust at all in my eyes. He just went about his work. He was one of the very best when on the ground while he was playing and got through unscathed. You can't really ask for much more than that. Lewis Hayes, I talked about Weideman before slotting in nicely with the AFL level defenders. I thought Hayes was fine against North. It was a bit cluttered at times, but it was rarely an issue. The last fortnight he's been playing, he's been really steady and solid, which is all you can ask from a key positional player. He's had some tough matchups in that time as well, but held his own. He had close to 10 rebounds against Williamstown, which is absurd. He had a lot less of the ball against North, but it's not really a criticism of a key defender. You don't need your big lockdown backs to be getting 20 odd touches, but I thought he was less influential in the air because of Ridley and Reid and Weideman, of course, and it shows that he's possibly still a decent way off featuring in the AFL. He's a bit behind them in the pecking order. Nick Bryan is absolutely pounding down that door for AFL selection. He has been more than dominant lately. He was great against Williamstown. He had close to 50 hitouts while getting a decent amount of the pill around the ground as well. He was up against one of the better VFL rucks too, and he towed him up, and that wasn't even close to his best game of the year because against North, he was obscenely good. Just listen to these numbers. He had 40 hitouts, 25 disposals, 2 goals, 20 kicks, and 15 clearances. Those are video game numbers. He was so much better than the North Rucks. It was honestly like watching a man play in the under-16s. He had 15 clearances for a ruckman. The stats will tell you all you need to know, really. He was everywhere. He was such a big presence, and I just hope he gets rewarded with it for some game time soon in the AFL. At the start of the year, I said he needed to impact around the ground more, and I don't know what more he can do now to get game time. You can't really play any better than what he did against North. That was close to a perfect game from a ruckman. He was absolutely brilliant and was really great against Williamstown as well. He's in very very good form. Alright, most of you clicked on this video for Nate Caddy, so here we go. It's been a much better fortnight for Nate Caddy. He had to try run a form before these games, so it was good to see him bounce back and really impact like we should be expecting him to. It's not going to be consistent. He's still very young, but it's good to have back-to-back games where he did more than play his part. He kicked 4 goals in these 2 matches. He had around 15 disposals in both 2, which is great for a player of his position. He just works so hard to get the ball up around the 50, which I love, but just his attack on the ball as well, it's so good. He flies and impacts contests that most wouldn't, and his tackle pressure, especially against Williamstown, I thought that was something we hadn't seen much of at all, really. All in all, 2 really pleasing games that can hopefully build some confidence from. He's yet to kick a small bag, 8 goals from 7 games. He is leading our goal kicking in the VFL, and of course he has since been rewarded with an AFL debut, which honestly I think could see him improve on form possibly. He's often up against 2 defenders at once at times in the reserves, so it's good. He's going to be given more freedom and less responsibility in an AFL forward line, almost as the 3rd key forward. I think we could see him perform pretty well, hopefully. Zach Reid played 2 VFL games and he's clearly ready to return to the AFL. He was excellent in both. He just looks like he shouldn't be playing at this level. He was so influential in the air, so clean, and a really decent kick for most part as well. You don't mind seeing the ball in his hand, which is good. I think he's built a lot of confidence in these last 2 games and should come back to play, hopefully against Richmond, maybe a week later if we want to rest him a bit longer, because he's obviously a young player with those injuries. He wasn't rested in that 2nd game though, against North Melbourne. I don't think so he's definitely match fit. Good signs. Luamon Lual has been struggling a bit recently. I feel like he's been shifted around more now that we have numbers coming back into the defence in the team. He spent quite a lot more time up the ground on a wing. He had a snap-on goal against North, I think that might have been out on the full, but he almost managed his first goal for the club, which would have been a little confidence booster. I think we'll see him flourish more when the AFL-listed defenders go back to the higher level. I reckon he's good enough when the moment calls for him to be, but that hasn't really been required much lately because we have stars back there. He's kind of hanging around in the shadows and not supplying that drive and energy that we've seen in some games so far this year. It's not an issue, just being shifted around and trialled in new roles and areas of the ground. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Jayden Davey, a tale of 2 weeks. He was awesome against Williamstown. He was dangerous, he was fast, he was energetic, he just brought the vibes in the forward line. He was a constant threat in front of goals all day. 3 goals, 2 behinds. He was also providing key forwards as well with some inside 50s. That was by far and away his best game in the red and black. He was fantastic. And then the following week against North, he went missing. He backed up a good game with a pretty poor one. He just couldn't get involved like he was against the Seagulls. But I think it's important to have games like this as a youngster. We now have seen him at his best and worst in very close succession. So now we need to make sure he bridges that gap and builds some consistency. Archie Roberts was uncharacteristically quiet against Williamstown. He had 17 touches, but it did feel like less. I think he was playing more of a defensive role because he didn't see his usual forward half game as much. But it was back the next weekend against North. I was half watching this game along with the AFL, so I don't remember exactly when it was in the game, but there was one period where he just looked the goods. You know when you're watching a young player and they just give those signs? I felt that. He's been really good and really consistent this season. He's also starting to feature in some stoppages around the ground, and that's always good if you can build your game in different areas. So he's doing his AFL chances no harm for 2024. Vigo Visentini has been solidly plodding, is that a word? Probably not, but he has been plodding along very solidly. He hasn't recaptured that pre-bye form. He had some nice moments in both games though. He was usually around the ball supplying a presence at the very least. He's that big body that teammates can fall back on. Bit of a bully at times, which I like, but in both games he didn't really get enough of a chance to really impact the game like we saw in previous weeks. It was just the 8 disposals and a behind against Williamstown, and against North he was obviously involved in the ruck less because Bryan was tearing up, but still did well to win stoppages inside 50. Tex Wanganeen is starting to lag behind the rest of the group a little bit, and he's been back on the park for a while now, so can't really blame it on his recovery. He just doesn't have the confidence to back in his own ability and take control of a moment or the game. He had some chances against Williamstown. He could have kicked 2 goals, which would have made his output far greater, but he just couldn't make the most of them. And it was a similar story against North. He had 10 disposals, 1 behind. Those aren't stats that you want to be seeing from an AFL listed player on the regular. Everyone has down games, but so far this year, that tally of 10 touches is his best, and he's only kicked 2 goals from 5 games. So he's really not showing much at all right now, which is concerning because it's the last year of his contract. We really need to see him lift, and soon, if he wants to stay on our list. And finally, Jye Menzie. He returned to the VFL after his shoulder injury and looked pretty good. He had quite a lot more of the ball against Williamstown than he usually does at AFL level. He was actively trying to get involved whenever he could. He was pushed quite high up the field. He actually played on the wing in both games at times, but I didn't mind it. I thought his foot skills were pretty good, especially going forward. He definitely has another level he can go to, and unfortunately wasn't able to go to that level against North. He seemed a bit more out of the game, in and out at patches. 13 touches, not bad, but he wasn't really in the forward line as much as you would see him in the AFL. That does happen a bit though with small AFL listed forwards. They get moved a good 20 to 30 metres higher up up the field in the VFL, and it also comes from the fact our forward line is so tall, so it's a bit of an adjustment for Menzie, who hasn't played at this level for a while, but he probably needs another good game before he's considered for the seniors. That is that though, a longer VFL review because we had a few more guys roll through the reserves, but a good fortnight for the club as well in both levels. Cheers for watching, like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new to the channel and to see more videos like this, and of course, go Bombers.